New updates in the Sean Diddy Combs legal saga. The rap mogul gets an official sentencing date. He gets hit with allegations from a shocking new lawsuit. A juror speaks out. And also, apparently, Diddy receives a standing ovation from inmates.
Diddy walked into the courtroom with the same confidence that had carried him through decades of fame, business success, and public scrutiny. His suit was immaculate, every detail perfectly in place. A silent statement that he was still in control of his image.
I have a verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, but I'll tell you what, this case, not over. No. Important hearing today, sort of. We got to talk about why. Well, Judge Arun Subramanian had sent a tentative October 3rd sentencing date for Diddy on his convictions of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Remember, that's what he was convicted of. He was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy, and he was acquitted of the 2 sex trafficking counts. But he was convicted of these prostitution charges. And at one point, there was reporting that defense counsel for Sean Combs and prosecutors, they had then agreed to switch the date to September 22nd. And we thought, okay, because today's hearing was supposed to be about expediting the October hearing. Then they agreed to September 22nd. Now apparently it's back to October 3rd. This is all over the place. Very confusing. We'll get it straightened out. I gotta say it's interesting because Combs' defense counsel had originally stated last week when it was the October 3rd date that they wanted that sentencing expedited, meaning they wanted it to happen sooner. And one of the things that Sean Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, had said was, quote, the mother of some of his children had passed away many years ago. These kids, the 2 daughters here sitting in the middle of Your Honor's second row, don't have a parent. Obviously referring to the death of Kim Porter in 2018, mother of Christian, Jesse, Delilah, Quincy. And by the way, remember Sean Combs was denied bail, so it wasn't even like he got to go home after the verdict, but clearly they wanted this expedited. They want his sentencing to happen as quickly as possible. They want him out of jail. They want him out of prison as soon as possible. And also it's interesting because prosecutors, they need time for the pre-sentencing investigation and report. Basically, that's when a probation officer interviews the defendant, looks at the history, the background, childhood, education, employment, criminal history, finances, the mental and physical health of the defendant. There are interviews that are conducted with family and friends. The officer looks at various court and school records, employment records, financial records. The officer could speak to the victims in the case, law enforcement that were involved in the investigation, provide all of this information in a report to the judge, because here the judge is going to have a lot of discretion when it comes to the sentence. What could a sentence look like? Well, prosecutors indicated in a filing that before even doing a pre-sentencing investigation, Combs is looking at 51 to 63 months, a little over 4 to 5 years in prison. The defense seems to be pushing for 21 to 27 months, so a little over 1.5 to 2 years. But remember, Combs has been sitting in federal lockup since September at the MDC, so if he gets time served, he really wouldn't be spending that much time behind bars. Now, of course, they're the extremes. When you talk about transportation to engage in prostitution, the maximum for each count is 10 years in prison. You stack them together, you get 20 years. Okay, based upon the facts in this case, it seems highly unlikely he would get that much. Other side, you get the idea. There's no minimum for this charge. So could he get time served and walk free? Also seems unlikely, in that you're dealing with multiple instances of transporting Jane and Cassie, the 2 victims in this case, and men across state lines for the purposes of sex work. You could say this is an aggravating factor why I don't think he's just going to get
the tie, the cufflinks, the polished shoes, all of it said he was here as a man of status, not a defendant facing the fight of his life. Yet, despite the presentation, there was something different about his eyes. They didn't dart around the room like they sometimes did during past hearings. They stayed fixed, locked forward, as if bracing for an impact he could already feel coming. The energy in the room was unlike anything the case had seen before. Usually, the minutes before a sentencing were filled with quiet exchanges, shuffling papers, or the low hum of whispered conversations between attorneys and their clients. Today, there was none of that. It was as if the entire room understood the magnitude of what was about to be said. Even those who had been attending court for weeks, reporters, court officers, legal aides, seemed to sit differently, back straight, eyes forward, waiting for the inevitable. The judge entered, and the gavel came down with a sharp crack. That sound, in any other setting, might have been routine, but today,
we had this hearing let's talk about it. Bringing back onto Sidebar, you know her very well, Law and Crimes reporter Elizabeth Milner, who, as you may know, was inside that courtroom every day for the Diddy trial. She's with me here. It's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in like 2 months in person.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, and you did great reporting. You're here. We did Sidebar recaps every day.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get into this monumental hearing, and I'm being sarcastic, you'll see in a second, Combs' defense counsel filed a letter with the court that outlined a brand new schedule. Then after the hearing, it was changed. What was the back and forth in terms of schedules? What's happening now?
I know. To your point, Jesse, it really was a back and forth. First, it was September 22nd. Now it's October 3rd. And it was something that the judge initially put on the schedule as Diddy's sentencing hearing. And then, back and forth happened. And now it's back to October 3rd, which I like to call Mean Girls Day. And so it was a lot of kind of going on here. And a lot of us were kind of confused as to, is it going to be September? Is it going to be October? But now it's official. It's going to be October. And there's a reason for it. There's a lot of stuff, like you had just mentioned, that both sides have to kind of work through. The defense was proposing that the probation office provide the parties with a pre-sentence investigation report, or a PSR, on or before August 29th. The defense objections to the PSR report will be filed on or before September 5th. And so a bunch of documents need to be filed. Diddy needs to be interviewed. Other people need to be interviewed. But it looks like we'll hear that sentencing hearing on October 3rd. It'll be a kind of a big bow to a very long case. We'll see what the judge kind of goes for in terms of the sentencing. It could be, like you had mentioned, to the lower side, to the higher side. But I hate guessing in this trial at this point, because every guess that I've made has been completely wrong. So.
No, we both agreed he would get convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, racketeering, sex trafficking, both up in the air. I'm not surprised by the jury's decision, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and Jesse, just some more to the schedule. For any post-verdict motions, the parties proposed that the defense file any post-verdict motions on or before July 30th of this year, and the government respond on or before August 20th. And then the government requests that if they be permitted to submit its summary of offense conduct on or before July 11th of 2025, and the defense doesn't object to that. So we'll see a lot more documents being filed that we're able to kind of talk about, hopefully a little bit more, but it seems that it's just a bunch of documents that'll be filed before the eventual sentencing hearing.
You know what I think is interesting? The post-trial motions. So typically speaking, those could be like a motion for a new trial, where the court would vacate the judgment and allow for a new trial, rarely granted, but may be done if the interest of justice so requires. There's a motion for judgment of acquittal, so the court could set aside the jury's verdict, allow the defendant to go free. And there's a motion to vacate, set aside, or correct a sentence, and I'm told that it's often successful for the purpose of correcting when there's a clerical error in the sentence. Now, assuming Combs has valid legal grounds to support any of this, I imagine he will file whatever motion he can for relief from either the verdict or the sentence. Then again, I don't know. He got a very favorable ruling. Obviously, he was convicted. He's not entirely happy with it, and his defense counsel explained that. But they also, in their press conference after the verdict, they were jubilant. They were ecstatic. And I wonder, if he gets a favorable sentence, is he even going to challenge this? I mean, they seem happy.
Yeah, they seem ecstatic, because the emotions that kind of ran outside of the courtroom, it was kind of double that inside the courtroom, where all the defense attorneys were hugging, they were crying. So seeing them outside in the press conference, all kind of holding hands, going up, that was just a little slice of the cake from what we all saw inside that federal courtroom. But I think it can kind of go both ways, and that's mainly because Sean Combs.
It seemed to slice through the room like a blade. Conversations died instantly, and all eyes turned toward the bench. The judge's face was unreadable, the kind of expression carved from years of presiding over high-stakes cases. They knew that their words today would be replayed on news networks, dissected on talk shows, and remembered for years. The judge began speaking. Their voice was calm but carried a weight that settled heavily over the room. They spoke about the process, the importance of fairness, and the duty of the court to deliver justice without bias. Then they turned to the case at hand. They described the charges in detail, walking through the evidence that had been presented, the testimony from witnesses, and the months of legal arguments. Each point was laid out methodically, as if removing any doubt about how the decision had been reached. Diddy sat still, his body language carefully controlled. His hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked, knuckles pressed tightly together. He didn't look at his lawyers, and they didn't look at him. Everyone at that table already knew the decision was moments away. The judge spoke of patterns of behavior that, in the eyes of the court, could not be ignored.
He's still behind bars right now. The judge didn't grant him bail even after the verdict. And I think his reasoning might give us a little kind of picture into what the sentencing might possibly look like, because the judge even pointed out during his denying of Diddy's bail after his conviction, which were on counts 3 and 5, kind of talking back to what had happened in June of 2024 with Jane and the violent altercation that happened over at Jane's apartment. And so I'm thinking, if the judge is already kind of on his mind about the whole domestic violence aspect and the physical violence that was exuded from the defendant, even just last year, I think it's possible maybe the judge, even if he hears from the family, even if he hears from Sean Combs' friends, that it's possible it might be kind of a little bit of a tougher sentence than maybe the defense was expecting.
Well, look, I think the defense might be wanting to take advantage of this, right? Now, the judge said, even though I'm denying bail and I'm looking at the violence factor, it's not a preview of what I'm going to do for sentencing. But I think this is the opportunity for the defense to submit any kind of mitigating factors and have the probation officer speak to his friends and family and talk about the impact of this. I mean, we just interviewed Charlucci the other day. So I wonder if they're saying, you know what? They said to Sean Combs, listen, let's wait for October. Gives us more time to present our case to Judge Arun Subramanian. And then we had the hearing today. This monumental hearing.
Was great.
You've been in court for 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
This was what, like 7 seconds?
I think maybe even less than, I would say,
What
kind
happened?
of close to 5. So
Yeah.
get all the way down to the courthouse. I'm like seeing everybody
Which
from
is not
the trial.
close from here,
No,
so people know.
it's not. It's not. And it was hot outside too. So
all the way downtown,
walking
yeah.
all the way down, or not, I didn't walk all the way downtown, from the subway to the walk to the courthouse.
Okay.
Get there, check in all my stuff. I would say the security check-in was longer than the actual hearing.
Okay.
So it was a remote hearing. We didn't see Sean Combs in person. We didn't see any of the attorneys on both sides. We didn't even see the judge. And so what had happened was we get inside kind of the overflow room.
Oh, the overflow room, okay.
Yep. So we get inside the overflow room. There's a big giant screen. It's completely black, but then you hear Sean Combs' voice being like, Mark, are you there? And so it was kind of like one of those dial-in type of hearings. And so we heard Mark Agnifilo's voice. Then all of a sudden we hear the prosecution's voice. It was Christy Slavic. She was accompanied by Emily Johnson, both who work on behalf of the government. And then all of a sudden, Mark Agnifilo was kind of like, you know what, we were able to work everything out as far as our sentencing date goes. And then the judge's clerk is like, oh, okay, so both parties agree, and then this matter is adjourned.
And that was it. I worried that's what was going to be, because when they had the letter basically working out the date, I was like, oh, what are they going to talk about? And then after that hearing is when they switched it back to October 3rd.
Yeah.
So not much there. You didn't see Sean Combs. Okay, let's talk about some other things that have been going on. First of all, big news. There's a new lawsuit that came out against Sean Combs. Okay, this is pretty disgusting. You have this unidentified John Doe who claims that in September of 2020, so relatively recently, he, Diddy, and others, they go to this warehouse out in LA that apparently contains some of the clothes of Notorious B.I.G., the rapper who was shot and killed in 1997, Sean Combs' friend. And people start taking drugs. They start wandering around this warehouse. And this John Doe claims that Combs started watching pornography on his phone. And that is when he claims, again, warning, pretty disgusting allegation, that Combs grabbed one of Biggie's t-shirts and pleasured himself with it, into it. I don't know how the best way to explain it. And even alleging that John Doe, or insisting that John Doe finish the job.
They referenced incidents stretching back years, some widely publicized, others only revealed during the trial. They spoke about the influence of power and money, and how those forces had shaped the events leading to this day. But they also made it clear, in this courtroom, power held no sway. The longer the judge spoke, the heavier the atmosphere became. Some in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at each other as if silently asking whether they were about to witness the impossible. Outside the courthouse, the sidewalks were lined with cameras and reporters, ready to broadcast the news within seconds. But inside, time seemed to slow. And then, without warning, the judge delivered the sentence. The number was longer than even the most severe predictions. It was a term that would remove Diddy from the public eye for decades, a term that would likely define the rest of his life. The words hung in the air, sinking in slowly, almost painfully. Gasps echoed from the gallery. A few people exhaled sharply, as though they had been holding their breath. Even some of the prosecution's supporters looked surprised. The attorneys at the prosecution table exchanged quick glances, their expressions betraying both satisfaction and shock. Diddy lowered his head, his jaw clenched tightly, his lips pressed into a thin line. He stayed like that for several seconds, unmoving.
I mean, I can't get into, attorney-client privilege
Sure, of course.
conversations. Obviously he thought about it, decided not to. And, as I indicated earlier, we thought the case had gone in really well for us. And so we liked where we were. So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made, but I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. They had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case.
His attorneys leaned toward him, their whispers urgent, but his eyes didn't meet theirs. The sentence was final. The reality was unshakable. The guards took a step forward, their movement breaking the momentary stillness. The sound of their boots striking the floor was sharp and deliberate. They didn't touch him yet, but their presence was a clear signal that his time as a free man had just ended. Diddy sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the bench. The public gallery was silent, every ear straining to catch the next word. Outside these walls, the world waited for breaking news alerts, for the soundbite that would define this moment. Inside, the air was so thick with tension that it felt like even breathing too loudly would shatter it. And then the moment came. The judge delivered the sentence. The number was longer than anyone expected, longer than even the most pessimistic predictions. A prison term so severe it sent a ripple of shock through the entire courtroom. Gasps broke the silence, followed by a stunned stillness. Journalists froze mid-note, glancing at one another in disbelief. Even the prosecutors, who had pushed for the harshest penalty, seemed momentarily taken aback. Diddy's head lowered, his hands clenched together in front of him, his jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, his composure cracked. He blinked slowly, shaking his head once as if trying to process the reality of what he had just heard, but the reality didn't change. The sentence was final. His attorneys leaned in, whispering urgently, their voices too low for anyone else to hear. Words like appeal and options and strategy were exchanged, but they sounded hollow. The judge's decision had been delivered with a tone that left little room for hope. This wasn't a slap on the wrist, and it wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. The guard stepped closer, their presence a silent reminder of what came next. The sound of their boots against the floor broke the oppressive quiet. Diddy remained in his seat, staring ahead, perhaps seeing nothing at all. For decades, he had built a life on control, controlling his image, his business, his music, his narrative. But here, in this room, he controlled nothing. For years, Diddy had built his career on control, controlling the stage, controlling business deals, controlling the way the public saw him. In the music industry,
it's running in, putting everything together, and the pressure. And I work in chaos all day long. That's my life. So, you know, when it comes to chaos, that's my specialty.
You handle it well, though. You handle it quite well, given the chaos.
I have to. If I, you know, as I said before, if I want to, you know, have a nice home, I want my kids to go to college, I want things to happen. You know, you got to do these things, and people rely on you.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said here, and it's important that you said it. Your reputation's on the line. So the idea of when we say, you know, nebulous, oh, you know, how can we trust a private security team? I'm happy you clarified that. I want to get really practical here, realistically.
Shoot,
Sean
yes.
Combs is released on bail. Okay, let's say he's released. He's home confinement. What exactly is he allowed to do and not to do? Is he really there's someone's going to be watching him 24/7? They're going to make sure he has no iPad, no iPhone. Can he give directions to people like associates or other people that are involved? I mean, the concern, of course, is that even if he's out and he's around people, he can still shake things up a little bit. He can still get messages out. I guess the question is, what does it realistically look like for him? Does he sit in a room? Does he only confined to certain rooms day in and day out? Is he constantly watched on tape and all of his electronic devices are searched on him constantly? I mean, what does it look like?
Well, again, it's really up to the restrictions of the court.
Sure.
I mean, I have people out right now that are on ankle bracelets. And, you know, they can't go, you know, 400 feet. They can go 800 feet. They can go, you know, wherever, you know, depending on what the restrictions are. In Puffy's case, the way we were putting it to the judge and to the Southern District was we were going to have a call log. So you could see who his calls were going to. We were going to try to take away his Wi-Fi in the building, which would have been a lot easy. We would have limited the people that would come see him. So at the end of the day, you know, we had cameras inside the apartment that we were going to do, which our people were going to put up. And we were going to all let the government be able to get into that system to see who was coming in and out. Of course, there's privacy. So, you know, we were going to make it very, very tight. Now, you know, when you're incarcerated, and I have a lot of friends that I know that that are incarcerated. When people come to see you, if you want to pass a message, messages can get passed. We know that. So if he really wanted to do something incarcerated, he might be able to. If he really wanted to do something when he was out, he might be able to. I don't think that he would take a chance on something like that to risk what he's gone through over the last year. Again, opinion on my end, you know, based on being 30 years in the industry, you just got possibly your life back. You were facing 30 years incarcerated possibly, and now you're going to take a chance on something like that. But again, no, I'm not in someone's brain. I can't determine how people think. You know, there's a lot of people that feel they're above the law. So I don't know how you know, Puffy thinks, but
history. He had been a master of shaping narratives, but here, in this courtroom, the narrative was out of his hands. The judge's words were still ringing in the ears of everyone present. They had spoken about accountability, about the responsibility that comes with influence, about how no one is beyond the reach of the law, and they had spoken those words directly into a moment that would be replayed endlessly across screens and headlines. Outside the courtroom, the world was already reacting. Social media timelines lit up instantly, with reactions ranging from disbelief to celebration. Newsrooms scrambled to cut into live programming. Former associates, industry insiders, and critics all began weighing in, but none of that noise had reached Diddy yet. He was still sitting in the chair, shoulders squared but heavy, as if the weight of the sentence had physically settled onto him. When he finally stood, the room was silent again. His movements were slow, deliberate, his eyes stayed forward, avoiding the faces of the gallery. The guards flanked him, and together they began walking toward the side door that led to the holding area. It was a short walk, but it felt long. Every step carried him further away from the life he had known and deeper into a reality he had spent years avoiding. The courtroom remained still after he was gone. People lingered in their seats, as though leaving too quickly would break the spell of what had just happened. For some, it was a moment of vindication. For others, it was a reminder of how quickly power can crumble. Outside, the noise was immediate. Microphones were shoved toward anyone who looked like they might have an opinion. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Cameramen scrambled to get the perfect shot of the courthouse doors. Commentators speculated on what prison life would mean for someone like Diddy, how he would adapt, how he would be treated, whether he could ever return to his former position in the industry. Inside, the official record would show a sentence delivered according to the law, but for those who had been in the room, it was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the moment the image of Diddy as untouchable shattered completely. The man who had once stood above the fray, who had shaped culture and controlled empires, was now just another inmate waiting to be processed into the system. And in the days that followed, as the news cycle churned and the public debate raged, one truth remained constant: no matter how famous, no matter how powerful, no matter how carefully a persona is built, when the gavel falls, it falls the same for everyone.